cover art is one of the most important aspects of any game. The difference between a cover that stands out and a cover that turns people off can potentially have an enormous impact on a game's popularity. So today I'm going to be judging every cover art from every Souls game based on my personal taste and putting them on a tier list. The criteria for how I place them will come down to two things: looking cool and doing a good job of representing its game. Also keep in mind that this is easily one of the most subjective lists I've ever made, since I'm basically just comparing images based on how hard they go and feeling like a proper advertisement for the game they represent, meaning there's probably no way to avoid hate comments on this one. Anyway, let's begin. Starting with, of course, Demon's Souls, we've got the US cover art, the one that I have. Like a lot of other covers on the list, it goes for a pretty simple style, but I like it. The ethereal magic surrounding Ostrava looks cool and creates a decent contrast between him and the pitch black background, which represents the game well enough since it's like venturing through the unknown with the power of the Nexus. It works, but there are many others we're going to talk about that I prefer, so it's a B for me. Then there's the one that's exactly the same except red instead of blue, also a B tier. Next we've got the Japanese cover, and I personally like this one a lot more. I know these days Demon's Souls isn't often considered to be the hardest Souls game, but all of these games still have a recurring theme about overcoming tough challenges. And damn does this cover convey that super well. The defeated position Ostrava's sitting in, combined with all the arrows sticking out of his shield, really makes it look like he's been through some shit. I also think the lighting in this one makes his armor look way cooler, so this sits comfortably in A tier. Now for the final Demon's Souls entry, we've got the remake cover, and it's cool, I guess. Having the Gates of Boletaria as the backdrop is a neat idea, and overall it does look pretty clean, but it also feels a bit, I don't know, standard? I'd say it does a good job of conveying how clean the game looks compared to its original version, which I'm sure was a big part of the goal for this one. But it doesn't really grab me from an artistic perspective. It's kinda just like, yep, that's the game. So I'd say low B tier is fair for this one. Moving on to Dark Souls 1, we're starting with the US cover. Over the years, I've actually heard a few people make fun of this one, and, well, it's certainly not my favorite. I honestly feel a little on the fence. Unlike the last cover we talked about, I appreciate that they at least had a unique vision for this one, but this might just be the most confusing cover out of them all. I feel like this exact same picture could be slapped onto a number of other medieval action games and it would work fine. Nothing about it really screams, this is Dark Souls 1. So while I think the image itself looks decently cool in a vacuum, I'm gonna give this one a C. Now for the Japanese cover. I'm not sure what other people think of this one, but this is an easy S tier for me. Unlike the US version, I think it damn near perfectly captures the essence of Dark Souls 1. Surrounded by an endless void of darkness and ruins of once beautiful castles, the chosen undead takes a brief moment to rest at the bonfire, the only source of light in the image, and the player's only source of hope in this unforgiving land. Also, it doesn't hurt that the elite knight armor looks good, so like I said, easy S. Next, let's take a look at an absolute classic, the Prepare to Die edition. Obviously, since this version of the game comes with the DLC, they decided to make Artorias the main selling point, which I think is pretty damn effective. Not just because the DLC is named after him, and not just because he looks awesome, and not just because he's easily one of the best bosses in the game, but because of how his character embodies the struggle of every undead. He failed at his mission, but he did all that he could to fight against the corruption of the Abyss. Also, this is easily one of the most straight up Berserk references FromSoft has made, which I'm totally cool with since Guts kinda represents the same struggle. Overall, I think this is an A tier. Now for the Black Knight cover. Once again, I think this does a great job at doing a lot with a little. It kinda reminds me of the US Demon's Souls covers with its pitch black background contrasted by the ethereal light. Except something about this one goes a little harder in my opinion. The color choice just feels super fitting for DS1, and I love the noble stance the knight is in. Plus, a Black Knight feels like a worthy enemy type for representing the game since they're the most loyal knights of Gwyn, and just some of the toughest, most memorable enemies in Lordran. I think this is a solid A tier. Next up is a cover that I had literally never seen until now for this video, but despite that, I think it's pretty good. Part of me kinda wants to see what it would look like if they didn't throw the Black Knight in the middle, leaving the cover as just the elite knight helm. But for what it is, it works, and I think the light source coming from the top gives this one a bit of a different feel than most of the others. I'll give it a high B tier. And to finish off Dark Souls 1, we've got the remaster. Overall, I think this one is great. It kinda has the same vibes as the Japanese cover with the comfort of the bonfire fire, while also showing an actual place from the game as the backdrop, being Firelink Shrine of course. And it's definitely just one of the cleanest covers on the list, another A tier for me. To start off Dark Souls 2, we've got the US vanilla cover. As far as DS2 covers go, this one definitely isn't my favorite, but it's pretty solid. The Farum armor set obviously looks cool, and something about the grayness of the vague background feels kinda atmospheric in a way none of the others do. I think it's easily an improvement in capturing the essence of its game compared to Dark Souls 1's US cover, so I'll give this one a B. But now we've got the Japanese cover. Man, I don't get why they even bothered making different covers for different nationalities when the original Japanese ones are always better anyway. This is an easy S tier, and I don't think I need to do much defending for most of you to agree with me. Like, holy shit. If I was walking around a store looking at games and saw this, my interest would immediately peak. I don't want to feel like I'm repeating myself too much, since a lot of these tend to go for a similar vibe, but the dark, foreboding woods surrounding a dripped out knight who's been beaten down with that small light of hope at the bottom, it's just so beautiful. Easily one of the best covers for a Souls game. Moving on to the Black Armor edition, we've got another absolute banger. There's nothing particularly deep I could say about it, but sometimes all you need is a nicely detailed picture of a dude in Farum armor with some flames in the wind. Simple, but really effective for me. A tier. Next, we've got the first cover for the game's Scholar version, and my opinion on this one is almost exactly the same as the previous one. Just a knight in some awesome armor trying to look cool and mysterious. Nothing more, nothing less. But once again, despite the simplicity in terms of both the visuals and what it's trying to convey, I think it looks great. Just good enough for the top of B in my opinion. Last but not least, we have the other cover for the game's Scholar edition. You know, say what you want about Dark Souls 2, but they hit so damn consistently with its box art. I love this one. Getting to actually see Vendrick on the front of the game is so cool, especially since the age-old dictators of the worlds in these games are usually kept out of sight as much as possible in order to make them seem like more of a big deal when you actually reach them. And I don't think putting Vendrick on the front does a disservice to him whatsoever, especially since the image is meant to be a bit shadowy and vague. I'd even say it makes him feel more mysterious since it emphasizes the goal of finding him and learning more about him. So I'm placing this one in A. Now for Bloodborne, and unfortunately, the US cover of this game is really disappointing. Why is it like this? It almost seems as if they completely forgot that they had to make an alternate cover, so they just took the hunter from the real cover, plopped him in front of a plain gray background, and added some red swooshes. I hate how out of place this looks side by side with other awesome games. Admittedly, it does kinda get the job done, and there's just enough of that Yharnam backdrop in the middle to give you an idea of the setting if you look closely. But this is a personal list, and I personally don't like it, especially since it makes me wish we could have just gotten the real cover instead. D tier. Speaking of the real cover, let's talk about it. For me, the difference between these two is like night and day. You still get the cool looking hunter in the middle, but this time he's actually plopped in the middle of Yharnam, which looks awesome. There's enough solid detail in it to give you a real sense of the gothic vibes you'll be experiencing, while also not showing too much in order to hold your interest. It's great. Part of me wants to give it an S, but compared to those two covers already up there, this one doesn't really grab me as a piece of art in the same way. It's really accurate for representing its game, but doesn't quite have that extra flair to make it stand above the rest, so I'll leave this as a high A. Next, we have another banger, the Game of the Year edition. My favorite thing about this cover is that it's easily the one where the hunter protagonist looks the coolest. Like, damn. And the red tint on the Yharnam background actually works pretty well in my opinion. It almost feels like it's there to represent just how bloody this game is, plus it creates a much better contrast with the central hunter than the dark grayish backdrop of the Japanese cover. And the little Lady Maria at the bottom representing the DLC feels just small enough to not be intrusive. Overall, I think this one is another A tier. And for the final Bloodborne entry, we've got the Old Hunters edition, which is literally just the poster art for the game's DLC. I think it looks pretty cool, and Lady Maria's obviously got a lot of aura sitting in her chair cross-legged. The Astral Clock Tower also makes for a surprisingly good background. If I were to guess, I'd say most people would probably put this one high up in A or S, but for me, I think it belongs at the bottom of A. I don't have anything against it, but I just don't really find it to be a peak representation of the game like some other people do. Beginning Beginning Dark Souls 3, let's talk about the game's original cover, which for once is finally just the same in every country. Honestly, I've always found it a little odd that FromSoft decided to spoil the game's final boss by slapping him right on the front, but at least it makes for a damn solid cover. If you ask me, the armor set looks cooler here than it does in the actual game, and I love the combination of the embers and the torn cloth blowing in the wind. I also think the choice of yellow for the background looks nice, and I like how some of the stuff back there can be seen at the very end of the Ringed City DLC. Plus, it would be hard not to mention the amount of memes that have come out of this one. I think this is a solid A tier. Next up is the game's Day 1 edition. It kinda gives me similar vibes as the Dark Souls 2 Black Armor edition, where it's nothing more than a cool close-up of a knight and his weapon, but it also does that pretty well. The big difference though is that this one doesn't get a real background. If it did, then I might consider this to be up with the top tier stuff, but as is, it's cool enough, and I think it fits comfortably in B tier. Now it's time to get mixed up in different nationalities again, because we're looking at the US version for the Fire Fates edition. And I mean, it's certainly a cover of a video game. I don't know, I feel like if the original version of the game's cover didn't exist, then I might not take any issue with this one. But damn it, it's like they literally just said, hey, why don't we make it the same as the regular cover, except boring? In a vacuum, I'd say it might be a B tier, but partially out of me being salty for FromSoft's laziness with US covers, I'm giving this one a C. Now in direct contrast, we've got the Japanese Fire Fates edition, and yep, of course, why the hell wouldn't they make this one an absolute masterpiece for no reason? I love Gale sitting in the front with his sword in place of a bonfire, along with the painter sitting behind him with her empty canvas. It's a cool way of representing both DLCs at the same time, while also not feeling jarring since these two characters are actually connected. Not to mention that Gale is absolutely a character who's worthy of representing the game. I also love the colors in the background of this one. Compared to other top tier covers, I find it a little hard to put into words exactly what makes this one work so well, but something about the positions of the characters and the color choices just works so well for me. I think this is an S tier cover. Well, moving on to Sekiro, it's finally time to witness what I consider to be the very first win for the non-Japanese covers. This one. I feel like this image perfectly represents what to expect from the game. The fact that Wolf is visibly strapped with 3 weapons at once makes it obvious that Sekiro is heavily action focused, but also the dark and shadowy vibe of the area he's standing in, along with looking like he's trying to hide his face from the camera, helps to give off the sneaky shinobi vibes. Also, compared to say the Japanese Bloodborne cover for example, I think the color of Wolf's clothes help a lot to make him stand out from the dark background. Overall, I think the way he looks here is the coolest that any of the Souls protagonists look on any of these covers. And on top of that, it's such a fitting picture for its respective game. Not sure if this is a hot take, but I think this belongs high up in A tier. Next, we've got the Japanese cover. I used to think this one was a little underwhelming, but it's grown a lot on me over time. Wolf here definitely doesn't look as cool to me compared to the other cover, but he's still got it. He looks determined to slice up anyone who stands in his way. And the background is actually really nice. It's got a bit of cool architecture here and there to grab your attention, and the fact that it's mostly white, contrasted by the occasional red leaves, is such a nice touch. There's just enough going for it that I think it's worthy of A tier. And finishing off Sekiro, we've got the Game of the Year edition. This one's just pretty solid all around. Wolf's stance is cool, and it's neat how the background foreshadows the eventual fall of the Ashina clan, which happens in-game. For whatever reason, I just don't have a whole lot to say about this one. I like how they went for something completely different from the other two, and it looks good in its own right. For me, it's a high B tier. Now, for the very first time, we've got a Souls game that only has one cover, Elden Ring. But luckily, they really made it count, because this is an absolute banger. I think they did an awesome job at conveying the size of the game through this image. You've got the knight doing a cool pose in the front, but you can also see a bunch of giant structures way off in the distance, which feels accurate to the game since the journey to the end of the map is such a long one. And the titular Elden Ring looming over everything looks great, while working as a light source to highlight all those background details. Personally, I can't quite say that this cover is on the same level as those in S tier, but it does so many things right that I think it's among the best of A tier. And for the very last cover art, we'll be looking at the unreleased Elden Ring Nightreign. I definitely think this one slaps. The guy in the middle looks great, the heavy rain coming down makes it feel really atmospheric, the blue flames across the ground are cool, and the background works at being magically intriguing. I have no idea what my full thoughts on this game will be when it releases, but for now I can at least say that I really like the cover. A tier. Well, there it is. Every Souls cover art ranked from worst to best by me. Of course, I'd love to hear your opinions on the topic, so feel free to tell me your thoughts on these covers in the comments, while being as respectful as you can, cause like I said, I already know people will be up in arms about this one since it's so easy to have drastically different opinions on the subject. But for now, that's all I got. I'll see you guys next time when I rank every main Elden Ring boss from worst to best.